Welcome to the Great Basin Smoke Dispersion Briefing for Friday, May 26th. This is Gina McGuire. Over the last 24 hours, we've only seen light amounts of precipitation over the eastern two-thirds of the Great Basin, with some isolated to widely scattered thunderstorms mainly across Utah and into southwest Wyoming. Over the last 7 days, most of the precipitation did occur really within the last 24 hours, but some lighter amounts over the eastern side of the Great Basin, with very dry conditions over southern and western Nevada and the Sierra and into western Idaho. Even over the last 30 days, the image on the right shows the percent of normal precipitation, which has been really well below normal across Nevada into western Utah, and near normal only over parts of the central Idaho mountains and over parts of the Arizona Strip into southern Utah. The satellite loop from this morning shows an area of low pressure now over southern Idaho, which will continue moving eastward and is still generating some clouds and precipitation over mainly Idaho, far northern Utah, and to western Wyoming. This area of low pressure also brought cooler temperatures to the Great Basin, with temperatures dropping to near normal after the well above normal conditions we saw over the last week. Now looking at the ventilation index for today, we have very good dispersion over much of the Great Basin, with the exception of parts of Wyoming into eastern Idaho, and this is mainly due to still some gusty winds. Looking at the individual components of winds and mixing heights, winds on the left shows these gusty winds mainly across the Arizona Strip into southern and eastern Utah, however will not be as strong as what we saw yesterday, but we'll still see gusts between 25 and 35 miles per hour in many of those areas. Further north and west we'll see much lighter wind flow, with the wind shifting to the northwest around that area of low pressure. Mixing heights will remain relatively high across all of the Great Basin, with the exception of slightly lower conditions over eastern Idaho into Wyoming. If we move into Saturday, this area of low pressure moves off to the east, with high pressure rebuilding over the west, bringing drier conditions. There may still be a few showers or clouds over the far eastern side of the Great Basin, and winds will decrease across the area. Ventilation index will still remain high due to higher mixing heights, with the exception of parts of Idaho and into the Sierra. Again, looking at these transport winds, as that low pressure system moves off to the east and high pressure builds, we see much lighter winds, especially over the western half of the Great Basin, but even across Utah, as winds shift to the northwest, we will still see some gusts between 15 and 20 miles per hour at times, but again, much lower than what we will see today. And today, with those gusty winds, we still could see some areas of increased fire potential, especially in some of our lower elevation grasses. Mixing heights again will be high across the Great Basin on Saturday. Looking into Sunday, we have this strong ridge of high pressure still in place across the west, and you can see a little bit of moisture now over the Sierra in the higher terrain, and that's mainly in response to the warm temperatures and building cumulus clouds. Therefore, we could see a few showers or isolated thunderstorms. The rest of the Great Basin will likely remain on the drier side. Ventilation indices may decrease under this ridge of high pressure by Sunday over parts of the northern half of Nevada into Idaho and Wyoming and northern Utah. Looking at the winds on Sunday, again very light across the area with high mixing heights. Looking at the forecast clearing index for Utah over the next few days, clearing indices will remain very high with those gusty winds today across Utah and will gradually decrease, especially towards Sunday, as we see much lighter winds under the ridge of high pressure. If we look at the overall forecast amount of precipitation, much of that precipitation will occur today over the eastern side of the Great Basin, with amounts generally below about a half inch of total precipitation, with the exception of a little bit more near the Wyoming-Idaho border. Also, as we move through the next few days into this weekend, we will start to see some thunderstorms building over the higher Sierra, so we could see some localized amounts of precipitation in that area as well. Now looking a little bit further out as we get into the holiday early next week, we are still sitting under a ridge of high pressure. Therefore, we'll likely see some thunderstorms in the higher terrain along the Sierra and possibly even further east, although they will be fairly isolated. Conditions have been warm and dry recently, therefore fuels are in various states of curing across the Great Basin, so we could see some increased fire potential if we do get some starts in areas where we have some grasses. The ventilation index will remain quite good with the exception of the eastern half of the Great Basin as those lighter winds settle in for another day. By Tuesday, the ridge starts to move a little bit further east and we get a trough of low pressure to move in off the west coast, which will bring some increasing moisture to the area, so we see a better chance of thunderstorms as we move into later on Monday and into Tuesday into areas of the Great Basin. We'll also see winds shift to the southwest and start to increase slightly ahead of this low pressure. Dispersion will still remain good across the Great Basin, except in the northern areas where winds will be relatively light, still under that ridge of high pressure. By Wednesday, the low pressure system starts to move eastward into the Great Basin, bringing better chances of showers and thunderstorms to much of at least the western half of the area, with increased clouds further east. Dispersion again will remain quite good, especially across Nevada near that area of low pressure, and be a little bit lower as you move under the ridge over parts of northern Utah into Wyoming. By Thursday, low pressure moves over the southern areas of the Great Basin, with moisture being more widespread across the area. Still good dispersion is expected. Looking at the overall forecast amount of precipitation from Monday through Wednesday, there's not a lot showing up on the overall national picture except in Wyoming. However, we could certainly see some lighter amounts of precipitation across the Great Basin during that time. If we look a little bit further ahead into the first week of June, we're still looking at very warm temperatures across the Great Basin and dry conditions over northern and western areas, with better chances of above normal precipitation across the eastern half of the Great Basin. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.